Hey fans, so here we are loaded up in the cab of the Southern Pacific GS-4. I've placed the locomotive and consist on the upgraded Cajon Pass route that you can find on Railworks America. And what we're going to be doing today is I'm going to be demonstrating the function of the semi-automatic trailing truck booster that I've coded into this physics mod for this locomotive. As we roll along, I'll explain how this works, and hopefully we can get this train up the Cajon Pass. So paired with the locomotive today, I have a typical coast daylight consist. Has 16 cars, and total train weight is 1,465 tons. Now, an important thing to note before we start rolling along here is how to calculate the tonnage ratings for steam locomotives, and pretty much honestly any locomotive of any ruling grade. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to obviously know the locomotive's starting tractive effort. In this case, without the booster, the tractive effort is 64,800 pounds, and with the booster, it is 78,850 pounds. 78,650 pounds. That's correct. With the booster cut in. This is obviously starting tractive effort, so those numbers are only applicable from 0 miles an hour to about maybe 10 or 15 miles an hour. Next, you're going to want to know what the ruling grade of the route that you're running on is, and in this case, the ruling grade on Cajon Pass is 2.2%, which means a rise of 2.2 feet over a distance of 100 feet. That 2.2% ruling grade is, I believe, is a prevailing standard among most railroad routes in the United States. A lot of routes that serve freight in the steam era are a lot less steep. Say, for instance, the Allegheny subdivision on the C&O has a ruling grade of 1.14%, as does the Wasatch route on the Union Pacific. Of course, we know that Sherman Hill has a ruling grade of 1.55% on the old route and 0.82% on track 3. So now that you know the starting tractive effort and the ruling grade of the route you're on, you're going to want to use this mathematical formula. On level tangent track, train resistance is equal to about, I want to say it's 4 pounds per ton, if I have that right. I think it's 4 pounds per ton. Every percentage of grade that you add on adds 20 pounds per ton. So if I'm running a train up a 1% grade, then my resistance is equal to 1 times 20 plus 4. So my resistance, my train resistance, going up a 1% grade would be 24 pounds per ton. Now, this is not taking into account curvature, obviously. Curves add resistance as well. Although it is sort of harder to ascertain what the maximum curvature is on a lot of routes. That data is not as available as ruling grade data most of the time. So I'm not going to really focus on how much resistance curvature adds to the train resistance here. So, to calculate the tonnage for the daylight locomotive going up Cajon Pass, what we're going to do is we're going to take that 2.2% ruling grade, multiply it by 20, which gives you 44, and then add the 4 pounds of resistance that comes just from tangent track. So that gives you 48 pounds of resistance per ton. Now that you know that you have that 48 pound value, what you're going to do is you're going to take your starting tractive effort and you're going to divide that starting tractive effort by the resistance number that you figured. So you're going to take, let's take the non-booster number first. So we're going to take 64,800 and divide that by 48. That gives us a value of 1,350 tons. So this locomotive would be rated at about probably 1,300 tons on this ruling grade without the booster. Obviously, you don't want to make this rating right at the maximum tonnage that this locomotive can haul, obviously because of track quality, adhesion, and the fact that if you were to tie 1,350 tons to this locomotive and try to go up a 2.2% grade, you wouldn't really go faster than about maybe 5 or 10 miles an hour. So by keeping the tonnage somewhat below the maximum, you can actually ascend the grade a little bit faster than you would if you had maximum tonnage. Obviously for a passenger train, that tonnage would be a lot less because you need to roll that passenger train up the grade at about probably no less than 30 miles an hour. You would probably want tonnage to be closer to, total tonnage to be closer to about maybe 1,000 tons or even 800 tons. Remember, this tonnage rating includes the weight of the locomotive, so you need to know the weight of the locomotive if you're going to state the tonnage ratings as trailing tons only. So, tonnage ratings, this locomotive weighs 430 tons. So if we take 1,350 and minus 430 tons, the trailing tonnage trailing tonnage rating on this locomotive going up at 2.2% grade with no booster cut-in would be 900 tons. Now with the booster cut-in, we're going to take that value of 78,650 and divide that by 48, that gives you a trailing tonnage, not trailing tonnage, sorry, a total tonnage rating of 1,638.5 tons total. So we're just going to be conservative and say 1,630 tons. That would be what this locomotive would be rated to haul of a 2.2% grade with the booster cut in. As I've mentioned earlier, our total train weight for this consist is 1,465 tons, so we're nominally lower than the total tonnage rating with the booster cut in, but a little bit above the tonnage rating for the booster cut out. Now, trailing tonnage rating for this locomotive with the booster cut in would be obviously 1630 minus 430. Gives you a tonnage rating of 1,200. So with the booster cut in, you can actually haul 300 more tons up this 2.2% grade. So boosters are quite effective if used properly. Now let's take the time to talk a little bit about boosters, for those of you who are not familiar with the concept of a trailing truck booster. So the booster would be basically a mini steam engine attached to the rear wheel of the firebox truck of the locomotive, and it would power the rear wheel of the firebox truck. Now, it's not really modeled in this sim. Obviously, if you look back there, you can see an empty space where the trailing truck booster would be mounted. What the booster would be connected to is what is known as an idler axle that has a cog gear connected to it. The way the booster would be connected to the rear axle of the trailing truck would be through what is known as an idler gear that sits between the idle axle and the rear axle of the trailing truck. When you wanted to engage that booster, what would happen is you would obviously start the booster up, prime it, let it run for a little bit to get the lubrication oil through the cylinders and whatnot, and then to engage it, you would initiate a control in the cab that would be located to the very close proximity of the reverse gear, and what that would do is it would drop the idler gear down, and the idler gear would engage the cog gear on the idle axle and the rear axle, and they would connect those two axles together, and the booster would now drive the rear axle. Now, as you increase speed, obviously, the booster starts to use a lot of steam, and the effectiveness of the booster starts to taper off since the tractive effort drops significantly, since the booster is actually rotating a lot faster than the main driving wheels, since the rear wheel of the trailing truck is a lot smaller in diameter than the main drivers. So you want to basically cut the booster out, depending on how the booster is geared to the rear axle, at speeds between 10 and 35 miles an hour. Now, a high-speed trailing booster is a lot rare. It's used on passenger locomotives, but they were effective up to 35 miles an hour. Typical trailing booster speed ratings were between 15 and 20 miles an hour. The one equipped on the GS-4 is rated for about 21 miles an hour. So you would cut back, you would cut that booster out around 20 miles an hour at a maximum. So the way I've coded this booster to work is similar to how it would have been set up to work on a real-life locomotive. There's an interlock that is built into the power reverse gear. When the reverse gear is all the way in the corner forward, in this case 75% on the GS-4, the booster is cut in. As you begin to notch back the reverse gear to shorten the cutoff as you accelerate, once you pass a certain point, in this case 60% cutoff, the interlock feature kicks in and the booster cuts out. So if you want to cut in the booster, all you got to do is push the reverse gear forward. You'll notice that we are on the 2.2% grade now, and we are dropping in speed considerably. If I leave the cutoff at 58%, the locomotive will end up stalling. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to notch that cutoff up to 60% or higher, and that will cut in the booster. You will notice that we will stop losing speed so quickly. Alright, so we are at maximum cutoff. Locomotive is supplying the maximum tractive effort that it can supply at 13.5 miles an hour with the booster cut in. We should be able to hold about between 10 and 14 miles an hour with the booster cut in on this ruling grade with this consist. Now, of course, as a passenger locomotive with a passenger train in tow, this speed is not ideal for this grade. Obviously, you want to be sort of at least twice as fast going up this grade with the passenger train. So, in standard practice, coast daylights would actually have 2 locomotives on the head end when ascending grades of 2.2%, which were encountered on the route between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Obviously, I don't have a second locomotive right now because that would sort of defeat the purpose of me demonstrating the function of the trailing truck booster. Talk a little bit about the whistle that I have, about the whistle that I have installed on this locomotive at the moment. The whistles that I've included in this locomotive are the default Hancock 3-chime long bell step top whistle, which is prototypical for this class of locomotive. I've also included the Southern Pacific 6-chime whistle for this locomotive, and the pitch that you hear the whistle being blown at is accurate since it was recorded off of this locomotive. So you might know that as steam pressure increases, the pitch of the whistle increases as well. Now, most recordings of the SP6 chime are made between 200 and 250 pound steam pressure, so to use a standard recording on this locomotive would not be accurate. So I had to dig online to find recordings of the 6-chime whistle actually equipped on 4449 to get a recording at 300 pound steam pressure. So the daylight consist doesn't actually use dome cars, but there's not like a lounge or tavern car in this repaint scheme that is not a dome car, so that's why I have 2 dome cars on this consist. The actual daylight consist also is interesting in the sense that a lot of the cars are articulated, meaning they share trucks between the articulated joints, which is also pretty cool. I don't think that's modeled in Train Simulator, so this consist is actually a lot longer than and probably also a lot heavier than a standard daylight consist would be. But I have to say that paint scheme is beautiful. Alright, so we've hit a short section of 1.2% grade, so we're going to accelerate a little bit. If speed increases to above 20 miles an hour, I'm going to have to cut back on the reverse gear to cut out the booster until speed falls back below 21 miles an hour. That would be the prototypical way to operate this locomotive here. As soon as you see that I pull the reverse gear back below 60, we immediately begin to lose speed again because I cut the booster out. So as we drop below, I will cut the booster back in. The ideal fire mass for this locomotive, I've set it to 68% on the heads-up display, or 67%, which is 2/3 of the total fire mass that you can have in the locomotive firebox. So you want to try to keep that fire mass as close to between 65 and 75% as possible if you need that firing rate and steam generation. As you might remember, as released, this locomotive has really poor steam generation capabilities, so that's obviously fixed. You can keep a level head of steam as long as you're being responsible with the reverse gear cutoff settings. So this locomotive will reach speeds of probably around 100 miles an hour with a lighter consist on level track. Alright, so that's really all I have for this demonstration of the locomotive booster. I mean, the only other thing I could think of doing would be to stall this train and try to start with the booster and without the booster, just to demonstrate that it in fact does actually work that way. So why don't we do that before I cut away to some passing clips further up the pass. We're gonna bring this train to a stop. So we're on a 1.9% grade, which should still be pretty steep in terms of the tonnage rating that we have on this locomotive. So I don't think I'll be able to start this train without the booster cut in on this 1.9% grade here, but we will find out. Alright, let's see. Alright, so as you can see, at 59% cutoff, which is just below the cut-in point for the booster, we are barely picking up any speed, if at all, with this train on a 1.9% grade. If I'm going to notch this reverse gear up to 60% or above, I'll cut the booster in, and we should be able to accelerate to about maybe 12, 13 miles an hour. And there you have it. Booster is now cut in at 61% cutoff, and we are starting to accelerate. So yes, this does really work. I think it's really neat. There's probably a way to add in a sound for the booster functioning. I imagine that would be somewhat complicated. You would need to code the sound so that the chuffing is a lot faster than the main chuffing, and then also code the sound so that it would only play at cutoffs of 60% or higher. I'm not really sure if that's actually feasible given the way the proxy code is written, but that's something I might be interested in investigating sometime in the future. one more note about the power reverse gear and the way that you can sort of use the steam chest pressure gauge in Train Simulator to control your reverse gear. As soon as the steam chest pressure reaches maximum boiler pressure, you can use that as a indication point to start notching back on the reverse lever. So when this needle hits 300, I'm going to pull that reverse gear back 1 or 2 ticks, and then leave it there until the steam chest pressure climbs again to the maximum boiler pressure. Alright, so there you have it. That is how the booster functions on this locomotive. I'm going to cut away now, and we're going to go further up the pass to some grade crossings and whatnot. See if this locomotive will climb any faster than this. So, thanks for watching. As always, the download for this mod is in the description, so make sure you read the description like you should in most of my videos. And thanks for watching. Until next time, see ya!